It's not particularly silly, is it?
I mean, the right leg isn't silly at all, and the left leg merely does a forward aerial half-turn every alternate step.
Yes, but I think with government backing, I could make it very silly.
Welcome to Dirt, Sweat, and Gears, where if it ain't broke, we don't fix it. And let's face it, even if it is broke, half the time we still don't fix it. We're back here with the Prelude, and now this wasn't a video that I was intending to make, but things kind of got away from me, and well, here we are. For the past month, I've been living the Prelude lifestyle, and if you know what that means, it means I've been waiting on parts. There is a problem with the suspension on this car. After all of that work that I did, I took it out on the road, and I hate it. It drives terribly. There is something wrong with the rear end, and I'm going to show you exactly what that is, and that will explain why I'm waiting on parts. And while I was waiting on parts, I decided, why don't I try to fix the trunk popper solenoid? Be a quick little thing. I don't need to record it. And I did. I fixed it. It works. I can pop the trunk with the button that I have somewhere in the car. But then I decided to hook up the stereo. And, well, it got even worse. So first, let's go take a look at the suspension, and then I'll pop the trunk, and I'll show you where I am with this stereo. So if you watch my last Prelude video, you'll see that it didn't really end very well. I took it out on the road, and the rear end was just bouncing around like crazy. Initially, I thought it was because I didn't have the sway bar, but I got the sway bar on, and it's still a problem. And so I brought it back home, and I want to show you kind of the test that led me to the conclusion that I came to. So first, when you test a suspension, you push it down. You push down on the car, and you see what happens. I want to show you first a bad suspension. So with that, we're going to go over to the TR7, and I'm going to show you what a bad suspension looks like. So this is a very simple thing to do. You just go to the corner, and you push down on it. You see how the whole car just kind of bounces and keeps bouncing and keeps rocking around? This is obviously a bad suspension. Now for a good suspension, let's go over to the Maverick, and I'm going to show you what happens when you do the same thing on a car with a good suspension. So I want to show you on the Maverick because the Prelude has a little bit stiffer suspension, and by a little bit I mean a lot. So it's going to be a very different dynamic. So you see here when I press down on it, it's confident, it compresses and rebounds and doesn't shake around. The rear end is not quite as good as the front end on this car because it's got kind of old leaf springs, but the rear shocks are still good. So this is still a great example to show you. Let's move to the Prelude, and I'm going to start with the driver's side rear. All right, so the driver's side rear, I'm going to push down right here on the quarter panel, and we're going to see what happens. It's a little bit stiff, but that's the nature of the car. The car has a stiff suspension. But you see when I push down, it goes down and it rebounds. This is a good shock. And now let's do the same thing with the passenger side rear. Doesn't really do anything. I mean, it moves a little bit, but as you can see, it's a lot stiffer than the other side, which means there's a problem here. Ugh. So here's what I think happened. I believe that when I took the rear suspension apart, this shock was already kind of on its way out, and when I removed it, I fully extended it when I took the car off the ground, and it kind of locked itself fully extended. That's the only thing I can think of. I know that's not the most common thing to happen, but it does happen. And I have heard a noise coming from this shock while I was driving it before I did all of this work. It was just a little bit noisy. It sounded like it was starting to go bad. And I guess taking it off the ground and, pulling it kind of put it over the edge. So that's what I think happened. And which, of course, means I need new rear shocks. And since these are Ksport coilovers, that means I had to go directly to Ksport. Ksport doesn't make these anymore for this car. They had to manufacture rear shocks specifically for me in order to put in this car. Now, that's actually really cool of them to do on what I guess is a discontinued product. I mean, maybe they kind of make them as they're ordered or something, but it has taken, you know, a good 4 weeks now. They've assured me that it's going to be only a few more days, so hopefully I'm going to get it in just kind of as I'm wrapping up this thing that I have for the stereo. But that's what we are setting out to do here on this project. We definitely need to get this rear end fixed and back on the ground and driving again, so that I can go to these shows that are coming up. There's Japanese Classic Car Show, there's Radwood, and there's potentially, I might take this to Sadwood down at Escondido with the Escondido Cars and Coffee crew. Failing that, I'm going to take the Miata because the Miata is definitely a front runner for worst in show. So while I wait on these rear shocks to come in, let me pop the trunk and show you what I got going on inside with my stereo. You can see here I have everything apart, and that wasn't always the case. In fact, I had this thing completely back together the way I wanted it, and I started up the car, turned on the stereo, and I hated the sound. And I'm going to overlay the picture over what you see here just so that I can kind of explain what was happening. So I had the speakers on each corner facing each other, and when I cranked up the music, I was playing, I think, Rage Against the Machine. I want to say it was the song Take the Power Back. And so that song has a really strong bass intro. So I cranked up the bass, and I got pretty much nothing. It sounded like my stereo, my speakers weren't even working. But then when I come out back here, I could see the cones just shaking back and forth. They were clearly doing their job, but it just wasn't a good orientation of those speakers. So I ripped it all apart, and I started to experiment with the positioning of the speakers, and I wanted to get back to my old configuration where I had the two 10s sitting about 6 inches away from the back of the trunk so that when the sound waves hit, they reflected off of the trunk and turned the entire trunk into a speaker box. That was an amazing sound, and I want to get back to that because while the old configuration or the new configuration that I am now reverting to an older configuration, while that was really clean and it was allowed me to use more of the trunk, this car, I've had this car for over 20 years. When I get in this car, I want to go back in time. I don't need this car to be practical. I have that car to get around. I have that Jeep to move stuff. And in theory, I have 2 trucks to haul things. I don't need trunk space in this car. I want to get back to having fun with it. I want to go back to my college days. I want to relive, my youth when I get into this car. And I'm not even that old, and I'm still saying I want to relive my youth. So that means I want the best sound possible out of the stereo. And we are going to make sure that happens. So now I know kind of more or less the orientation I want to go with. I'm probably going to rotate the battery so that I can get a couple more inches here. And I'm going to pack the amplifiers off to this side so that, the battery hardware kind of is going to take up that space. Anyway, I may as well just kind of move everything there. And then I can stack the 2 speakers side by side a little bit off here. And I think the weight of the speakers and the weight of the battery, it's going to balance out really well. So I'm not really too concerned with throwing the car off balance. So that's my plan. I'm going to get to work. First thing I'm going to do is rotate the battery and unhook all of these cables, because that's really going to be the challenge. Once I figure out the positioning of everything, then I have to rerun all of these cables, and I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to accomplish that yet. They were cut specifically for the orientation that I had, and now moving things over a bit might throw things off. I might need to order new cables. That's really kind of the biggest change that's going to happen here. It's like it was made to be this way, and I just didn't know it yet. I didn't have to touch the battery tray. All I had to do was move the entire board, this base that the blue carpet is on. I just had to move it over a little bit because it was off center. It was too far to the left. So once I moved everything to the right, I got the clearance I needed for the subwoofers, and they just fit perfectly. So there is a little bit of a gap down here. I have used one of my blocks and just kind of test fit it, and it will fit under it if I can get the flashlight out of its way. So the block will fit under it and prop it up perfectly. However, this particular block is just too long. So if I can cut just a smaller block, a shorter one, it will fit in here exactly as I need it to. And then down here, there is a gap between the block that I have nailed to the bottom of the subwoofers and the baseboard. And this gap I can use to run wiring. All of these wires that are hanging out of the car over here, I can put underneath the speakers to come in over here next to the amp. So now my next challenge is to fit both of the amps in this space. So now I've kind of determined that this is going to be the layout. So I had to pull this subwoofer because the block that I have nailed to the bottom of it is a little bit too big. So this block fits the subwoofer perfectly against this board. However, I need some space for these wires. So this one has that space. So all I really need to do in order to get the subwoofer fitting perfectly while allowing for the wires is to cut a block that is about that size. Here, 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 here. Just that little square. If I cut that, mount that to the bottom of the subwoofer, should be perfect. And then I'm going to need to cut another block that is about this size so that it rests on top of the frame without hanging off, because that might cause some stability issues. It might wobble or something, I don't know. But this one is perfect exactly the way it is. We have space underneath it for the wiring, and all of the wiring, I might just have to trim a couple of pieces, but they're all going to reach this new location. On the subwoofer amplifier, I've got this block, which is a little bit too long. I want to trim it down so that it matches up with the top of this piece here. And then I'm going to screw the subwoofer amplifier into this piece here, and then screw the other half into this piece here. The worst part of this is actually these RCA cables. They barely reach. So if I tug on it really hard, I can get it over to the subwoofer. The only thing is I need to know which one is the subwoofer. So that actually means the next step is to turn the stereo on. And in order to do that, I first have to charge a capacitor. And really, you can use anything that will transfer power from one side to the other side. The idea here is that you want to transfer power slowly from the battery into the capacitor, because if you just slam this thing down, it's going to spark. And you don't want that. It'll kill your capacitor. I mean, it might not kill it today, but doing it in the long term, you will shorten its life. So now I'm trying to get the, there we go, get the fuse in between the two washers here. And now I just see light coming on. And so, oops, dropped it. So you see the light coming on? When the light goes out, I'm going to start seeing the digital readout on my capacitor. The capacitor, this particular one has a digital readout. You don't need one with a digital readout. You just need to basically really wait for the light to go completely out. And once the light goes out, that means your capacitor is charged, or at least charged well enough, and it is transferring power. So I am now looking at my capacitor, and it's saying 11.8, 11.9, and it looks like it's going to stay at 11.9, so I'm going to go ahead and connect it. So now I'm going to start the car up, and I'm going to turn on, I guess I'll turn on Desecrate because I have permission to actually use it. And then what I want to do is, on my head unit, I can turn off the subwoofers, turn off any signal going out to the subs. And so that's going to let me know that, whichever pair of cables that I have that has nothing coming out of it, that's going to be my subwoofers. Okay, as you can see with the lights, the stereo is on, but obviously no signals coming out of anywhere right now. And I think this one is my subwoofer set because nothing is happening from that cable. This one has sound, and that one has sound. Okay, so the one that I don't want to be the subwoofers is the subwoofers, so that's cool. All right, so I know the subwoofers are working, but there's not a lot of bass on this track. I want to find a track where the subwoofers move. I can't really see it happening because there's just not a whole lot of low-end kicking bass. So you see it shaking a little bit though. So let's switch to something that is copyright. You're not going to be able to listen to it, but you'll be able to see it real soon. Copyright, but you can see it moving now, and that's awesome. And then once I crank it up, like Zach says I should, there we go. It's really moving now. So now we're going to close the trunk and hear it from inside the car. Here we go. It's about to get loud, and it's going to hopefully be what I want it to sound like. Oh my God. There we go. Yes! Alright, that's enough of that because I don't want to get a copyright strike. But I have the sound I want out of this car. So I posted a photo of my stereo setup on the 3rd Generation Prelude enthusiast group on Facebook, and it stirred quite the controversy, which obviously means I'm keeping it this way. But let's just go over some of the comments from the page because it's pretty good. Do you mean you like or dislike the car shaking apart from the bass? I used to run 2 JL12s in my demo car days, always through the seat area. All the sound where you want it, in the cabin. Bro, that's some try-hard stuff. It really doesn't matter which way they face. Ported or sealed enclosures or windows up or down, which will make a bigger difference than which way the box faces. Yeah, okay, I've only been doing acoustics in-car and in-house for 40 years. I guess you just want all the nasty resonant shaking and rattling in the car rather than hearing what the speaker produces in the car. Well, good for you. I'm talking about sound quality. You stick your SPL game and I'll continue with listening to what's actually recorded rather than what's being added by SPL goals. You don't need or want to bounce sound off your surroundings. That effect is in the recording. Just curious, what measuring equipment do you both use to tune the enclosures and adjust the actual sound inside the car? Talking about sound quality on a 1 ohm Class D setup. Before that, it was orchestrated musicals in theater built for an audience and clearer sound. You are being a try-hard. Stop it. Nobody ever cares. Nobody cares if you think you know everything. It's annoying and it's false information. Wow. Having to adjust things to suit yourself is one thing. Not necessary, but I get why you might want to. But that is not required to listen to what was intended on the recording. I can assure you my expectations are probably way higher than yours. I've had 40 years trying to get my in-house sound the way I want it. Still spend a long time doing it, just as I build my own amplifiers and speakers and crossovers, etc. I think you are getting very confused between what you want to hear and what the recording producer intended you to hear. That is why you feel the need to adjust things to suit different musics and mixes. The problem is that you aren't looking to hear what was intended, rather what you want your interpretation of it. It's not the same thing. All right, I could go on, but suffice to say, this is controversial, so I am absolutely keeping it. And in fact, this inspired me to do a little bit of a mini-series here. So you heard the comment where a good stereo should be able to play any type of music and still sound great at any volume. I'm going to accept that challenge. But to set the record straight here, there are a lot of styles of music that I like to listen to, but not very many that I like to listen to in the car while I'm driving. To me, driving is the experience. I don't sit in parking lots or go to shows with metering devices, to measure the sound waves, the resonance, the frequency response, and all that stuff. I listen to music with my ears. I listen to music while I'm driving, sometimes with the windows up, sometimes with the windows down, and that does change the way it sounds because you've got things like wind buffeting. You've got the tone of the engine as it's revving up and down. How does that interact with the sound coming out of my speakers? Sometimes you've got a passenger in the car that is blocking the speaker in the door. So there are a whole lot of things that change the way music sounds, and I guarantee that's not what was intended by the recording artists at the time that they were recording the mix and they said, yep, this is ready to ship. The recording artist isn't going to pair their music up with the sounds of a V8, with the sounds of a 4, with the sounds of a 6-cylinder engine revving at whatever frequency. That's just ridiculous. So what is intended to hear by the artist is not necessarily what you're hearing in the car. I can almost guarantee you that is not the sounds that they were intending for you to hear when they recorded their tracks. Okay? Get that out of the way. So with that, this is going to be a little bit of a review series, a review on music, the review of my car, how it interacts with the music while I'm driving it. This is going to be something that is very subjective because music is very subjective. Everybody experiences music differently. Okay? So not only because everyone has different tastes, not only because some things sound terrible to some people that sound great to other people, but also biology. People's ears perceive sounds differently from one person to the next. Just like how we all have different voices, we all have different ears. So this is going to be a really interesting exercise for me personally. I don't know if you're going to benefit from it. Maybe you will. Maybe it'll be fun for all of us. I know it's going to be fun for me, which is exactly why I'm going to do it. The new shocks are finally here. They came in these tubes. Well, the tubes came in a box, but they came in these tubes. And it is aptly labeled rear strut Honda Prelude BA5 87 to 91. And this is just the shock. It doesn't have the base or the top or anything like that. It is literally just the adjustable shock. So this means I have to take apart the car, take apart the shock that's in the car, and then reassemble it and then reinstall it. Not so bad. Let's get to work. Before I get the car off the ground, I want to measure this because I set the ride height where I wanted it. In fact, it looks like it's actually sagged a little bit since then. So we're going to take a measurement on the back. Oh yeah, this is way lower than I wanted. It's because the shock is bad. 24 and an 1/8. Over here on the front, it is damn near 25. What's the passenger side shock at? Passenger side, 24 and a 1/4. Damn, dude. And the front is same thing, 24 and 7/8. So I want the rear to be at 25. All right, Prelude's off the ground. I've loosened the lug nuts. No big deal. So now we got to go into the trunk and take off the bolts from the top. So my particular setup is a little bit sucky because I got a battery here and I got a bunch of electrical stuff here. So in the interest of safety, I'm going to disconnect all of this crap so that nothing is going to shock me if I end up touching the ground. And in fact, I am going to have to touch the ground because one of these ground wires is actually in the shock tower. So let's get this discharged so that I don't hurt myself and set my car on fire again. While I'm down here, a quick shout out to Bober Garage and Carolina for my sway bar and links. If I had to give one criticism, is that the bushings are not quite the right size. They're a little bit undersized down on the bottom. That's not a big deal because the bushings that are the correct size for this are really easy to find, and depending on how these hold up, I may not even need to get them. I think I'm probably going to be just fine. Now the upper bushings I also didn't use, and that was no fault of Bober Garage. The upper bushings I used were because I have white line sway bars, and the inner diameter of the sway bar is a little bit different than stock. So unfortunately I couldn't use the bushings. I did use the sleeve though, but overall the end link itself is just awesome. It's really robust. The metal is really thick. The weld is nice. The paint is really great, and it looks awesome. So I'm really excited to get this car back out on the road and to feel this new suspension. So there's only one thing left to do, right? That's to actually get up off this creeper and go for a drive. So just a couple of things I want to do off camera. The first thing is I need to trim this piece that goes between the two amplifiers. I'm going to do that off camera just because my garage situation right now is a little bit in flux. I'm going to need to go get my table saw, and there's just a bunch of stuff that I need to move around. There's some construction happening, so I need to get that taken care of first. But the other thing I wanted to do is cover this bracket. This bracket holds, helps to hold the two subwoofers next to each other, just so a little bit extra security so they don't flop around. So for that, I got this little metal plate, and so I'm just going to get some like sticky backer with Velcro on it to hold it in place. But I thought just to cover it might be a really cool just little thing to cover it. And then I have one more thing just for you guys that hate my stereo, the guys that hate the fact that it's pointed towards the back of the car, the people that told me I'm an idiot, the people that told me I'm wrong for thinking that this is a good way to go. I got this little guy just for you. Isn't that nice? You look how he is looking straight at the subwoofers. Don't you just love that? So once I get this thing trimmed up, I'm going to do the same thing, get a little bit of sticky backer for this guy over here. And then this will be my stereo. let's see how this thing drives with my new shocks. So last time I drove it, I had everything except for the shocks on the car. I even drove it with the sway bars connected and it was still horrible. So let's see how we do now. This street, it seems to be pulling to the left. This street is very much pulling to the left. And this is a pretty flat road too. Yeah, I might need to adjust the alignment on this. I'm not digging this. This street feels fine. So maybe it was just that street. Let's keep driving. Yeah, this street feels fine. The car doesn't seem to be tracking in one direction or the other. It seems to be doing just fine. It seems like it's not pulling. The steering angle when I turn the wheel lock to lock is the same from left to right, or within a butt hair anyway. The only squeaks now that I'm getting are from my seat. There's no squeaks from the suspension whatsoever. The control over bumps is awesome. The rear end feels great. It's planted, it's confident, it's not rattling, it's not shaking. This is awesome. Now, one of the things I was told about bushings was that this is like the single most effective thing you could possibly do to your car is upgrade to polyurethane bushings. I have yet to experience that. I don't feel like it's that much of an improvement over what I had before, but then again, we haven't taken any turns. So there's only one way to fix that. Now we're at the beginning of some pretty intense twisties. It's not very long. And there's a stop sign here. That's for sure. Wow. That feels great. That feels great. Alright, well, I'm going to keep driving it for a little bit. This was a success as far as I'm concerned. There's still a few little bugs to work out, but that is kind of normal when you're dealing with a 6-month-long project where you overhaul most of your car. But this is freaking awesome. I love this car. I am so happy that I got to sort out the engine, sort out the suspension, sort out the stereo. That's probably the next thing I'm going to do is listen to the stereo, because I know how much you all hate it, and that means I need to get on my new series that is coming up called Try Hard. Stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, like, share, subscribe, and comment. If you don't like what you see, I know you're out there. I know you're out there. I know you don't like what you see when I open the trunk. Leave a comment. All of those comments that you left in the 3rd Generation Prelude Facebook group, leave that on my YouTube channel, please. It will help out my channel. It'll get the algorithm showing my videos to more people, so more people can tell me how wrong I am. Please do that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.